The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows is brought to you by the StarQuest Production Network and is made possible by our many generous patrons. If you'd like to support the podcast, please visit sqpn.com/give. You're listening to The Secrets of Movies and TV Shows. Hi, I'm Dom Bettinelli, and you're listening to The Secrets of The Passion of the Christ, where we will discuss the hidden layers and deeper meanings of this fantastic movie from 2004. Sorry, I'm spoiling my reaction to it, but we'll hear what other people have to say. And joining me today on the panel are Andrew Hermes. Hi, Andrew.
Hi, Dom. How you doing?
Very well, thank you. And Mike Denz. Hi, Mike.
Pleasure to be here, Dom.
And another Mike, Mike Creevy. Hi, Mike.
Hey, good to see you again.
Yeah, good to have you. So I'm going to try to remember to refer you to you by your full names so that the listeners can distinguish between you guys. But if I forget, you bear with us. Try. I think your voices are different enough; it'll help. So we're talking about this movie. It came out in 2004. So as we record this, about 16 years ago, which is kind of crazy to think about. It seems like just yesterday. Directed, written by Mel Gibson, starring Jim Caviezel as Jesus. And it was a big movie for the time. It was a huge splash. And Mel Gibson, of course, being a household name, action star, and suddenly started doing these directing projects, including this one, and which really showcases his Catholic faith. And it was a big deal back then. There was some controversy about it, but a lot of people rolled out for this, not just Catholics, but Christians across the board went out to the theaters for this. What was your guys? I want to ask each of you your experience seeing this movie for the first time. What was it like? Was it in the theater? So let me start with you, Andrew. What was your first experience with this movie?
Yeah, I remember it pretty vividly because being I'm Chaldean Catholic, so the language that we speak and the liturgy that we have is one of the most ancient ones, and the Chaldean language is a modern form of Aramaic, and our liturgy still uses the old Aramaic, that the language that's prominently spoken in the film. So I remember in the Chaldean community, it was a big deal when the movie came out, and everyone was very excited to see it, including myself. But yeah, I saw it in the theater. I think I saw it at least twice in the theater. And I remember the first time it was very emotional. I mean, I was still in high school. Yeah, I was in high school. It was my it might have been my junior or senior year around that time. It was 2003 or 2004 when it came out. And that was around the time that I was taking my faith a lot more seriously. Right at the cusp of it, being more involved in at church and getting involved in youth groups and stuff like that. So it was a very special time in my life. That kind of was the genesis of my faith life as it is now. But yeah, the movie definitely it hit hard, and I know we're going to talk about those aspects of the film. But yeah, it was special. I mean, and saying that it was a film that was obviously spoken in Aramaic. A priest in my parish priest at the time, who's now retired, Father Michael Bazzi, was actually worked on the film as one of the translators.
Oh wow!
So yeah, and he liked to show off about that a lot. So it was
that's awesome.
Yeah, it was pretty cool.
Mike Denz, how about you?
I remember exactly where I was sitting in the theater. I don't remember which theater it was. I remember we consciously said, well, we're not going to buy popcorn. This just doesn't seem like a popcorn movie. We just went inside. It was my wife, myself, and a good friend of ours. And it was tense. I mean, you could feel that this was not just any movie that we were about to watch. And it was palpable in the whole theater. And when it was over, it was just silence. Right. Nobody, it was like you're leaving a church.
Yeah.
It was so quiet. I remember we went to Adoration. We just said, let's just go to Adoration. And I don't know if you remember, it was Ash Wednesday. Was the day it was released.
That's right.
So, there was, I guess we wouldn't have been able to get popcorn anyway, but unless that was your small meal. But yeah, it was very intense, and just the whole thing blew me away. I mean, you had all those what is it going to be like? It's really violent. It's anti-Semitic. All these things, that were going in, but and just seeing it and how absolutely well made, which I'm sure we're going to get into, that it was, how well done it was. Usually they give Christians, they'll like anything that's Christian, so we don't have to spend a lot of money on production. This wasn't the case at all. This was fantastic.
Mike Creevy, how about you?
Yeah, I was a sophomore at Catholic U, doing my undergrad work there, and I had been. It's kind of like a lot what Andrew was saying, but I was sort of taking my faith a little bit more seriously already since I had gone to college, especially that year, and knew that was coming up and was very interested in it. And then we always laughed about this. At Catholic U always had spring break, like February 27th, like the first week of March, which is like, some spring.
Right.
But, so I remember it came out Ash Wednesday. I didn't see it till I went home for that break. And I was just blown away from the get-go. And I do remember somehow I had pre-ordered the soundtrack. I've always been a big fan of film soundtracks, and that's something I'd like to talk about a little bit later too. John Debney's work on it's just incredible. And it literally changed my life. But I had listened to some of the soundtrack before I saw the movie, which didn't ruin anything for me by any means, but
no spoilers.
I think it kind of primed me for it,
right?
In a way. And so, but yeah, I hadn't heard a whole lot of detail. I think my brother might have seen it before me. But going into it, I knew some of what to expect with what the chatter was about the violence and that kind of stuff. And, some of the same stuff, Mike was talking about, it's anti-Semitic and, so I went to it and was just completely blown away. That's never gone away. And I was telling you guys before we started, I managed to slip in a rewatch today, and it was, if anything, it had a bigger impact than it did when I had seen it before. And I've probably, I can't even count how many times I've seen it. It became something I'd revisit, honestly, a few times a year for a while. And it was really just gripping and made it come alive and real for me, so that's my summary.
Yeah, I actually, to that last point, for a long time, I tried to watch it every year in Lent, and usually as close to, and perhaps sometimes during Holy Week as a preparation for Good Friday. I haven't in recent years, mostly because of the kids, and they can't watch it yet. They're not quite old enough yet for them to watch it. So, but it's something I want to rewatch again this year in Holy Week. I saw it with at the time I was dating my wife, and we went with my sister and her husband, and it was like, I think like you described it, Mike Dents, the theater was quiet. It was somber, or solemn, not somber, solemn. People were not taking it lightly. I've heard stories from people who went to the theaters, and it was like there were people who were being disrespectful and stuff, and that kind of undermines it. But where we were, people were quiet, respectful. At times you could hear a pin drop, when there was no music and it was just, the sound of the movie, and nobody was breathing almost at certain points of the movie. And like you said, at the end of the movie, you just kind of sat there stunned for a bit, processing it, and then just quietly got up and walked out. You don't want to talk too loud, that sort of thing. So yeah, it was a similar experience. So let's get into talking about the movie itself. First, let's talk about, Andrew, you mentioned the languages, the Aramaic. So there was no English. One of the first Bible movies I ever saw where the Jews or the Romans didn't have British accents or American accents, but they spoke only in English. I'm sorry. Only in Aramaic, Latin, or Hebrew throughout the movie. Those are the only languages you heard. Apparently, Mel Gibson wrote the original script in English, and then it was translated into Aramaic and Latin, like you said, Andrew, Aramaic by your priest, and also this Jesuit at Loyola Marymount, who also did a lot of the translating. Some of the scenes aren't translated. They don't give us subtitles for what's being said. Like during the scourging at the pillow, the Roman soldiers curse at Jesus, and they say, but they don't translate the words. And I think that's because they want the impact is more, that there's a greater impact. If we're not reading something at the bottom of the screen, the actions literally speak louder than words in this case. Do you guys recall that? I mean, is that something that rings true to you?
I can remember because I rewatched it over the last couple of days, and it's almost like they're like, for this scene, everybody's going to be quiet. We're not even going to do the translation because this is too sacred of a moment for us to have words being put over it. Just watch. And really, you didn't need it. I mean, there's nobody had to have a stitch of Latin or anything to know he's counting the lashes.
Right.
You knew what he was doing. And obviously, the way those guys were going, they were drunk. They would get the real brutal guys that would get good and drunk before doing this because it was such a brutal act. So there was no need. I mean, I'm curious. I'd love to hold up. They were speaking Latin, right?
Yeah.
A Latin translator, so I could hear so I could have my computer translate what they were saying, but there was no need. It would have ruined it. It would have taken away from it. Oh, really? Okay. It would have taken away from it if they had words over.
Yeah, I think the two that I remember he had mentioned, and I don't know it, but I can kind of catch it sounds like what I think it is. But it's at one point he says something like, it's like making music.
Right.
As they're kind of laughing, and he says something like beat him like a dog.
Right.
There's canine or whatever it is, something like canine. So he had picked up some of that. I remember back when it first came out that I was like, yikes. But
one point he says, flip him over, like he's like, he gestures and then says, flip him over, and so they can scourge him on his belly. Yeah. So it was interesting to have this movie like this. And Gibson, he said he decided to do the movie in the ancient languages because people know the gospel story too well. Like, we know it by heart. It's just ingrained. It's in our bones. We know the words. And so by having it in other languages that we don't understand, we have to pay closer attention. We can't just anticipate what they're going to say next. We have to watch. We have to be immersed in it. I think that's one of the reasons why this movie had so much impact. It's not just the violence of it, but this movie drew people in a way that, say, Jesus of Nazareth, or the one that Max von Sydow, was that the Max von Sydow Jesus of Nazareth? No, I forget. No. I always mix up who played what, but there are a couple of older from the 70s and the 60s that were huge in their time. I mean, Jesus of Nazareth was in every CYO or confirmation program in the 80s. It was huge, but this had an impact that those didn't, and I think partly because it drew us in a way because of the language. So I thought that was interesting.
I do recommend to people, I wanted to mention on that same note, it's actually really interesting to go and turn the subtitles off and just watch it with no subtitles, because I found when I did that, I already knew the movie really well, but something made me do that one time, and it, just like you're saying, Dom, that was especially interesting because it's like I really paid attention to every little detail, the characters' facial expressions, eye contact. Like, it just really opened up a whole new dimension. So I recommend that to people who haven't done that, especially if you're familiar with it already. It's a neat way to go about watching it.
I prefer to watch things without subtitles if I can, but sometimes I have to. Like, I don't know the language, or it takes place in the Shetland Islands, and they're supposedly speaking English, but nobody can convince me of that. But so in this case, I because I know the story, you're right, I could turn off the subtitles and I could still experience it and understand it. And because I've seen the movie, several times, I can anticipate. So I think that's a great idea. It's interesting.
I am glad they did it. I know that Mick Gibson had to be convinced to put the subtitles in.
Yeah.
And I was thinking about that again today because there was enough of the, dialogue. I mean, it wasn't like they were just quoting one of the Gospels. There was a lot of different things in there, and scripture passages taken from outside the Gospels and put in there and stuff that I wouldn't have known what they were saying.
Right.
I was happy that they did that because it would have been taken away from my experience
That's true.
a great deal.
That's true. So let's talk. We kind of touched on about the violence aspect. I want to read a quote that I found from Roger Ebert when he reviewed this movie. He said, "What Gibson is providing." By the way, Ebert was a Catholic. I think lapsed, but I'm not going to. He was an altar boy as a child, so he publicly said that, but he's familiar with it enough. He says, "What Gibson has provided for me for the first time in my life is a visceral idea of what the Passion consisted of. That his film is superficial in terms of the surrounding message, that we get only a few passing references to the teachings of Jesus, is, I suppose, not the point. This is not a sermon or a homily, but a visualization of the central event in the Christian religion, take it or leave it." End quote. I thought, wow. I mean, Roger Ebert, of course, is a great film critic, but he really got it. He got it. Like, Roger Ebert is not making a movie. I'm sorry, Mel Gibson is not making a movie that is teaching us, giving us the teachings of Jesus. He's not preaching the gospel in that more literal sense. He's teaching us the gospel of the Passion. That this is a violent event that is central to Christianity, and in fact, Christianity has long been accused of being morbid, a religion focused on death. If you when you step back, say our central symbol is of an instrument of execution. It's like we wear little electric chairs around our neck. I mean, it's kind of stark when you approach like that. Have you guys seen Carnival Row, that Amazon series? It's a sort of a fantasy series. There's a religion in it which is analogous to Christianity, but their central figure is the martyr, and their central symbol is a noose, and they wear nooses around their necks, like literally the loop, and hangs down. And it's stark. It's like, wow. Well, that's kind of what Christianity is like. And by, I think, separating the events from the central teachings, now we still get Jesus's teachings in this, but by focusing so closely on the Passion, we get a view of this, the most important event of Jesus's life, which is the death and resurrection. What do you guys think? Was the violence too much? Some people said it was too much blood and gore. It reveled in it. What do you think? Too much, or was it the right amount?
Yeah, I think, let's say for a viewer like me, I'm pretty, I can take gore. I can take, I'm pretty numb to a lot of those things. And so for myself, it wasn't too much. Maybe it was too much from an emotional perspective watching it for the first time, because, you're while you're watching the movie, you're sort of, meditating on the suffering of Christ, which is, I think, the whole point of the film. But, I trust that, knowing what we know about the film, that Mel Gibson chose to do it in the original languages that the people spoke at the time. And, they did the research theologically and historically to what they would wear, what kind of punishment the Romans would inflict, and specifically, what was unique about the punishment of Christ. Knowing that, that they put in all the work in pre-production and doing all the research, you want to just trust that, it's accurate. And as long as it's accurate, I don't think it's too much. I mean, obviously it's rated R. It's rated, what it should be, and take caution. Little kids shouldn't be watching the film, and so on. But you could argue, I mean, I've seen plenty of horror movies that I think are worse when it comes to gore and gratuitous violence. And obviously, in this case, it's not gratuitous. It's literally what a third of the world believe happened to their savior, and even more people believe historically that this happened too. So you could argue that a majority of the world believes that this actually happened. So I think that argument, it kind of, it's always up in the air, because there are always going to be people that are more sensitive to certain things than not. There are people that are always fighting over, the gore in movies in general. And then in my opinion, it's film's an art form. I know it's a generic thing to say, but it's an art form, and it's a way of depicting what happened, and obviously he took some liberties, I know we'll get into, like with how he portrayed Satan and stuff like that, but it wasn't just literally taken from the Gospels. Like you said, it focuses on his passion, and I think he was telling the story the way he wanted to, and it was a decision, and in my opinion, it wasn't too much.
I would say that it's just one of the things I think a lot of people learned is that for different reasons we've sanitized the passion of Jesus. We looked at our crucifixes afterwards and said, wow, that's actually pretty clean from what it could be there. I think that that's what it was shocking. All we get really in the Gospels is he was scourged. Let's move on. Why? Because everybody knew what it was. You didn't need to describe what would happen when you were scourged. And I remember, before that, like youth ministers or other catechists like I am would give a crosstalk and would explain what a cat of nine tails is and what it does to the skin and how it can stick, and it's just pretty graphic. But you want people to have an idea. This isn't just a whipping. This was so much more.
He didn't get the belt.
Yeah. Right. And now you don't have to. Now you can say, who's seen the Passion of the Christ? Okay. There it is.
Well, yeah, and that's what's interesting is I'm not showing this movie to my, just to be a big disclaimer here, I'm not showing this movie to my 14-year-old like freshman, but I did show them the Garden of Gethsemane scene with a little disclaimer, because it fit really well into what we were talking about, and it really because we just finished a unit on Christ is the new Adam, and helping them to see, you could see the light bulbs coming on, like, wait a minute, he's in a garden and there's a tempter, and it really made it click, which was nice. But in asking them, just talking a little bit about it, and I told them about the movie, a lot of them haven't seen it. And that, of course, might just be because they're young, parents haven't had them, watch that yet. But also, it's interesting because it's not part of their generation per se either. So I hope, for them, when they're ready for that, to be able to have that experience as well. And it is, it's brutal. But there's something, it's just hard to describe. Peter Kraft, I think, has talked about how it's, as he describes it, as the most beautiful film ever made. And it's also so bloody and so gory because of what it means, what it is. And I think especially for us, maybe as Catholics, not holding that over anyone who's listening to this who's not Catholic, but just because of how in our vocabulary, when how often we talk about the precious blood of Christ, to see it, I mean, it's all over the place. Like it's literally splattered, but it resonates because it's his blood. It just makes it completely different in its meaning.
Like that. Like that amazing part of that scene with the scourging at the pillar, where Pontius Pilate's wife had given Mary, Mother Jesus, and Mary Magdalene the linen cloths, and they were literally sopping up the blood of Christ from the ground, like these pools of, like, almost impossible pools of blood that they were sopping up. And there's nothing in Scripture that I think he got that from the writings of Anne Catherine Emmerich, that Gibson did, this imagery. But this idea of, like, they would sop it up because it's precious, because it's the precious blood that is everywhere. And you're right, it's. But I think partly because we are.
And by the way, I'm sorry, Don, real quick, because you'll still see people like in terrorist attacks and stuff like that. Sometimes they'll go out, and in some parts of the Middle East, they'll still do that.
It's a Jewish thing. In fact, it's a specifically very Jewish thing. At sites of terrorist attacks, stuff, you will have rabbis and others come out, and their specific there's a sacred task of gathering up the blood of the innocents that have been slaughtered. So it's very much in line with Jewish practice, as far as I know. If someone knows better, please. I'm always open to correction on that. But that's my understanding. One of the things what I was going to say was, as 21st century Americans, Europeans, Antipodeans, from Australia, New Zealand, 21st century people who live in relatively privileged place in the world, where we aren't submerged in violence, I think it's easy to become detached from what violence actually looks like in this case. For people who lived in more brutal times, like most of human history, or people who live in brutal situations now, people who Syria, parts of Africa, that were like Nigerians who are under persecution and that sort of thing. They know, they know what it means when you say someone is scourged or someone was brutalized, someone was executed. They can picture it. We had to have someone connect the dots for us with a movie like this. So I think that's I don't think it was excessive, and I think we're in agreement on that. Let's talk a little bit about how the movie depicts Jesus and his mother, because for me this was the moment in the movie that most elicited emotion from me. The moment that my heart caught in my throat. Well, and it still gives me chills, and it catches my throat every time I think of it. Even now, when he's carrying the cross, and he falls, and she sees him, and her heart is torn in two to see her child like this, and he says, "See, mother, I make all things new." I mean, I literally want to start crying now because of the weight of that sentence and of that moment of what that means for Jesus to look to his mother and say, "See, mother, I make all things new." What he has done there has changed everything forever for all of us. I mean, that, and it's his mother that he reveals this to. Like, his mother understands, she makes the connection, and her heart is pierced with the sword at that moment. I mean, there's so many great moments with his mother in this movie. What do you guys think of this aspect of the movie, this Mary's role in this movie? What do you guys think?
This is the only movie, and there are some great ones out there, where I wasn't watching the Blessed Mother and saying, Mary's not like that. There's every other movie or depiction is always like, I don't think so. But this one, everything she did was, wow, yeah, she would have done that. She found him in the dungeon. She knew where he was, and she was there with him.
Right.
She was the only one who could see Satan as well as Jesus. No one else could take him out. And she was always, she had her moments of sorrow. It wasn't weakness, but sorrow. But she was there. She was like, we're doing this. This is what we're doing. She was the one who started the, why is this night different from every other night?
Right.
When they first found out, because she knew this was the Passover.
In fact, can I interject? That line was the idea of the actress, Maya Morgenstern, who is Jewish. She suggested that line to Mel Gibson, that back and forth with Mary Magdalene. So so appropriate, so amazing.
Wow. Oh, it was great. It was awesome. And then the moment you mentioned, I know that I first saw it, there were two moments that brought me to tears. And right now, the one that you mentioned, Dom, is the only one I can remember. My heart leapt into my throat. She's running to him. They juxtaposed it beautifully with when she ran to him when she was a little child.
Yes.
And that he quoted what he said to John in the Revelation, "Behold, I make all things new," was for me the driving force behind the fact that this was a Jesus-driven movie. This was Jesus doing this. Mm-hmm. If you really are watching carefully, Jesus is the one who's the character that's moving everything along. Even one point, Mary says, "How long will you let this go on?" Because it's him. He's, and so, well, earlier we mentioned there's no catechesis, like, a teaching of Jesus from a parable or a sermon or something, but you are actually learning about the person of the Son of God and what he is doing as he's deciding, behold, I make all things new, and watch, part of that is I'm going to lift up this cross and I'm going to keep going because this is what I'm doing. And yeah, the moments with the Blessed Mother were just, I wouldn't change a thing. It was awesome.
Yeah, for me, I mean, this was if I had to pick one strength of the movie, the strength it's this portrayal of Mary and her relationship with Christ, because like you said, Mike, every other movie really didn't paint the picture right. This movie did it so well that, I don't know how a Protestant could watch this film and not be blown away by Mary and change their whole perspective of her importance. And yeah, everything from her assertiveness, her just recognizing what was happening, and taking it seriously, but at the same time, obviously her sorrow and her pain just being on full display was just perfectly executed. And like I mentioned earlier, I think this movie theologically is flawless. I mean, if you really want like a crash course on what type of woman our mother is, and how she would have behaved during the Passion, according to the gospel accounts and through interpretation and through tradition. I mean, this is it. This is the visual representation of that. You could easily call this movie like the sorrow of Mary. She was as much a part of the movie as Christ was. And I can't say enough about how Mel Gibson really nailed that portrayal.
Yeah, and I don't have really anything much to add, except to say that it's I do know a couple friends who are non-Catholic Christians, and they still are, but they were talking to me at the time about how her portrayal was very different than what they might have thought, and I was trying to, it was a great springboard at the time. I remember talking to them, and I was really kind of starting to grow in my faith more. So I was that guy who's like getting all this stuff from like Catholic Answers or from, all these different websites and stuff like, oh, well, let me tell you about Mary of the New Eve, and might turn them off a little bit if they're not ready for that. But it was just like, it was a great springboard. And I noticed, I made a note of this because I made myself really, really watch, and it was difficult for me to do, funny enough, but when they have the Pietà type, tableau thing at the end, again, like we said, we're not talking about the plot in order per se, because
right.
no spoilers.
We
here.
know the plot,
but when she's holding him, and she breaks that fourth wall and just stares right at you, into your soul. I really watched closely this time. She does not blink once. Like, she absolutely does not blink. It's like a full 30, 40 seconds or whatever as it's slowly panning back. And I really I had to do it to make sure. And my eyes are going dry as I'm trying to keep them open. And it's like, but I swear she doesn't blink once. I don't know if that was planned or not, but it really just seems to be like, here, all this stuff that I've gone through, all that I've seen, and now I'm looking right at you. And it wasn't accusatory, but it was just very much like, look at this. Whoever you are watching this right now, stop for just 30 seconds and think about the toll,
yes.
And that this was done for you, so are you going to make anything of it? I feel like all that's packed in there.
Yeah. And that actress, I think, is well known that she was with child during the filming.
Oh, interesting.
Yeah. Oh, you didn't know that?
I didn't actually. Yeah.
I don't remember that one.
Yeah. Gibson didn't even know until later on. I don't know what it was. He found out, and he's like, you're holding back out on me, So it was, there was something even, there's no coincidences that she, God had a pregnant blessed mother.
Yeah, like a real Jewish
mother.
Right.
Yeah, it was just a beautiful little tidbit.
Mike, I want to, you say it's not accusatory, and you're right. I would have said that in the past, but you're right. It wasn't accusatory. It was more like, this is what you have done, not her, because she's without sin. But this is what you, all of us, have done. What are you going to do about it? What are you doing about this? That's really the look. It's a mother's look to her children. This is your brother. What are you going to do about this? It's serious. Now, speaking of that Pietà moment and other portrayals of Mary in Jesus, there is one moment in another movie that I thought was really perfect. And it's a bit of a tangent. I'm sorry. But I have to point out, in Jesus of Nazareth, Olivia Hussey, she wasn't great as Mary the other time. She was too young in most parts of the movie. But that moment at the end where they take Jesus from the cross and it's pouring rain and she's holding him in her lap and she's wailing in grief. And I remember hearing, reading about that when that scene was filmed, she wasn't intending to bawl like that. But the emotion of that moment, that the reality of that moment really touched her, and she was literally uncontrollable in her sobbing in that moment. That was real, raw emotion from Olivia Hussey in that. So I think Maya Morgenstern's Mary it far surpasses. I agree, but there is that one moment in Jesus of Nazareth that really strikes me as well. So I wanted to mention that. There's the great scene where Jesus, it's his memory of making the table with Mary, that time before, and Joseph isn't in the picture. Joseph has already probably died by this point, and this is maybe just before the beginning of his public ministry, and so he's working and he's making the table, and he makes a table that you have to sit at. It's a bit of a anachronism. It's a bit of a Jesus invented the table that you have to sit up at. Yeah, I don't know, maybe, but
it was a slight attempt at comedy relief. I mean,
yes,
because we needed that, and
yeah.
It was probably the funniest part of the film,
right?
Which just doesn't say much. But
I love the image of like the creator. There's the absurd, and in a way, you could almost, I don't of course mean it disrespectfully, but it was his idea, like the almost absurdity of the creator God, living in an obscure, like carpenter's shop in Galilee for 30 years. I mean, it's almost,
Still creating. Let's start a trend. And the fact that she says it'll never catch on, and stuff. My friend that I told you that I had watched this with, I'll never forget this. And it was very well needed because this was after he was arrested and I think he was getting beat up and stuff. But I don't remember exactly where they cut away to that scene. But anyway, my friend leaned over to me after, Mary said it'll never catch on, and he whispers, Jesus invented the chair. And it was like, it was so funny to think that, and how they really set that up. And I use it when I explain the Last Supper, and I say, okay, they recline at table, they're on pillows. This is the way they eat still in that part of the world. And, so this, it's not like chairs. And then I tell them the story about, Jesus, the Passion of the Christ movie, and how my friend said that.
That's great. Yeah. So let's talk a little bit about Jesus's relationship to Peter in this movie. Peter is great. The actor looks great. It feels right. And then there's this scene where he denies Christ. And it's another one of those moments that really hits you in the gut because, you have to, see like Peter, it wasn't that long ago. Peter was like, I'll die for you. God forbid that they'll take you. They'll have to take me. And at this moment, when the rubber hits the road, when it's time to man up, and Peter denies him because he's afraid, and the pain and horror of that he suffers. I mean, I don't know about you guys. I identify with that. I mean, I've been there. Yeah. What do you think of the Peter in this movie?
I think I'm going to steal from Dr. Monica Miller on this one, who's written a book. I haven't read it, but I've heard a lot about it. And I've heard her interview it on it quite a bit. And I think it's out of print or it's hard to get. Like Abe Books has it for like $60 or something. So, but she was just on with Al Cresta. It was like late February. So if people want to go back and check that out, I forget which day it was, talking about it. And she pointed out a bunch of stuff that I'll probably, hit on later on. But, in particular, when she was talking about the contrast, and we'll talk about Judas, I know probably a little bit here too, but with Peter, it's amazing how so he does this, he has this terrible rejection of Jesus, but then he kind of literally runs into the church in a way.
Right.
He runs into Mary, runs into John and Mary Magdalene, drops to his knees and just confesses.
Yes.
And they were talking about this imagery for the sacrament of reconciliation, the whole forgive me for what I've done. And he runs off and he's completely distraught, as we know, but that was pretty amazing. And Judas, of course, doesn't do that.
That's the essential difference between Judas and Peter.
Yeah, they both had that moment of staring into Christ after he denied him 3 times. He has that look of the beaten up Christ looking right at him. Mm-hmm. And that was juxtaposed to when Jesus was dropped down the wall with the chains and he was hanging there, and Judas happened to be there, and they locked eyes. And what happens with Judas? A demon comes.
Right.
So it was like they both did really equally horrible things in a way, but they both went in different directions.
Right. Judas's sin was that he despaired. That was the unforgivable, that he despaired of the forgiveness of God. Peter denied Christ, but he sought forgiveness. Judas denied Christ in the way he did, but didn't believe that he could be forgiven, didn't believe that there was mercy available. He didn't believe the truth of Jesus in that moment. And so he went and killed himself. And what do you guys think? Just switch quickly to Judas because we're there now anyway. So let's talk about him quickly. What do you think about that scene where he encounters the children and one of them gets that demonic face? What do you think that was about? I know there's a lot of interpretation. What do you guys think that was about? Anybody have a particular, or do y'all have a particular? Andrew, what do you think that was about?
Yeah, I think, it's key. Like the few times that we see Satan in this film, it's for a reason, and also this demonic baby. I mean, a key time where this happens is when I think when Judas sees that demonic baby, that vision, you're literally seeing Satan starting to enter him. This is when we're talking about Judas's ultimate downfall. His suicide, the despair that you're talking about. It's literally a representation of how sin works. You're letting the devil in and you're letting Christ out. I think that's really what's happening there. And again, we just mentioned it's juxtaposed between how Peter handled his betrayal.
There's a lot of mimicking going on, which is perfect. Satan tries to ape Jesus, because he can't make anything himself. So here you have little children. They're first like, what's wrong? Are you okay? And kind of that subtle, drawing him in. And then it's like, we see the curse on you. We see blood on you. And they're really just distorted mockeries of the innocence of a child that are coming at it that are really, the exact opposite. Demons that want to needle him and make him ashamed. Not feel guilty to go to repentance, but ashamed. And you just need to kill yourself. You're rotten. You have blood on your hands. You're cursed.
Yeah, I agree. And I think, and sort of like his demons chasing him, his sins chasing him, and he's running through the desert also, which I don't think there's any mistake of that imagery, especially with the Israelites sort of experience in the desert, all kind of there. But what's he running to? He's just always trying to run to get away from him. And I think that's another thing Dr. Miller pointed out, which I thought was just brilliant, was, Judas, like everything he's doing seems to be either to try to fix it himself, or to get it covered by the old covenant. So he, how he's always like doing that thing, like he's always wiping his face, or almost like they're trying to wipe the betrayed kiss off his own lips. Right. Yeah. Like, so that, he's trying to remove it himself. He goes to the, and he's sincere, because it does talk about that in the Gospels, about that he repented of what he did, but not to the extent. Not the right. Really. Yeah. He feels bad about what he did. Maybe it would be a better way of putting it. And the idea of like, take the money back, help me undo this thing I did. And I was like, that's not how it works. Yeah. You can't, it's tainted. You can't undo what you did. The one who can fix this in a heartbeat. And I told my students that the other day. I was saying, if he had done that, would he be on holy cards right with the rest of them? And you can see some of them like they've never thought of that before. I'm like, yeah, he absolutely would be, because Peter did basically the same thing. So I thought the way that both those actors portrayed that was just so well done, especially when how short they're in the movie, really. Just the first few minutes. Yeah, that action by Judas running around trying to undo what he's done. You feel like Judas's motivation here was to not to capture Jesus, to have what happened to Jesus happen. He was trying to force his hand. Reveal yourself as the King of Kings. Come back and throw those rotten Romans out of the Holy Land and reclaim your role as king. Sit on a throne in Jerusalem. And he just didn't get what Jesus was saying about my throne is not a throne that's here on earth. And so he tried to force his hand, and it backfired badly. And then he tried to undo it. And yeah, that scene where he wants to give the 30 pieces of silver back, and the
the high priest is like, no, that's blood money. Like, we can't take that. Like, as if that wasn't the money he paid him as blood money in the first place. I thought that was, funny. But
Judas, what we're told about Judas is his, he's always listed as the betrayer.
Right.
But his first time Jesus starts talking about it is the bread of life discourse.
Yes.
Which would indicate Judas didn't believe in the Eucharist. And so, and he never was like spoken of in any sort of sympathetic way by the gospel. He was a thief. He didn't care about the poor.
Especially John's gospel.
Yeah. He did it, and so now he kisses the bread of life. And like Paul says, his lips are now, instead of being given life, they're rotting and they're all being chapped, and he's trying to scrape it off. So it's kind of like the opposite, what Judas didn't accept, and still trying to force Jesus to be whoever he thought he was going to be, or whatever his motives were. That was a big Jesus of Nazareth motive, that Judas was talking and like, if you just see what he can do, and we'll just get him in front of the Sanhedrin and he'll prove himself. But I looked at it more as, Judas was kind of slowly being disillusioned and, in his mind, and now he's just, well, at least I can get 30 pieces of silver out of this. But the rotting of his, his lips and, how everything followed after that. As we've all said, that showed really where he was at.
Well, and Mary too, at the end, like the contrast with her kissing his toes, getting the blood of Christ and the Eucharistic imagery, right, on her lips, is so incredible as well, of not understanding maybe fully or certainly being brokenhearted by the reality of what he's doing, but this acceptance of the blood, the shedding of the blood, which obviously Judas can't conceive of that. That's not how it's supposed to go.
Let's talk about the other Mary now, Mary Magdalene, played by Monica Bellucci. There is a great scene that Gibson included of where he makes it in this movie. He makes it very apparent, the traditional understanding that Mary Magdalene is the woman caught in adultery. That it doesn't actually say that in the Bible. That but tradition has held that that's her. But we have this great scene that he included from that moment. When they wanted to stone her, and he draws the line in the sand. That moment where the gospel says he was doodling in the dirt. But in this, this finger goes into the dirt and just draws it, and it's like an explosive action across the dirt, and it's like he's literally drawing a line in the sand. Cross this line if you're the one without sin. And I think I remember reading that was actually Mel Gibson's hand. Yeah, that he wanted it to be his hand to draw the line. He also wanted it to be his hand on the cross that they put the nail through.
He's the hammer. He's the hammer.
Yeah.
Oh, that's right. I'm sorry. Yes, you're right. That was Jim Caviezel's hand, but it was Mel Gibson's hand holding the hammer as a sort of act of personal devotion. And like, my sins nailed Jesus to the cross. But this Mary Magdalene in this is a very interesting character. Some people who don't understand might view her attitude as being an emotional, romantic attitude toward Jesus, if you know what I mean. Like there seemed to be this chemistry, electricity, but of course that's the misunderstanding that we have. But her heart was totally turned toward Jesus, and a modern understanding is, well, that must be it must be attraction. But what do you think of this? How this played out in the movie? This relationship between Mary Magdalene and Jesus that we see on screen, and her emotional reaction and connection to Jesus in this.
Well, this came out, now that I think about it, this came out right around the same time as Da Vinci Code, or in the same
time period,
in the same
time
few
frame,
years,
right? And the same cinematic universe. Before those were things. No, but it's interesting because obviously that was, and that was, like I said earlier, my college, and then kind of, army travels and stuff like that. A lot of people would bring that up. And to me, it was just interesting because it's, for one thing, as we often see, there's just the sort of a base kind of cultural leap to, it has to be sort of a if not a directly sexual relationship, at least like one that could be.
Yes,
a
like romantic relationship at least. Yeah.
Right. Like the impossibility to understand, friendship, quite frankly. And this, obviously, again, this is in the same rising time period as Facebook and social media and all that kind of stuff, which isn't, bad, of course, but the confusion of what a friend really is. And, I think when you read the Gospels, it's abundantly clear that she has this very special place among the disciples. But I just, it's so obvious that it's this sisterly, you could say, kind of role. It's one of absolute just love and devotion that doesn't carry any of that with it. And I thought the portrayal lined up with that for me personally. And there's all these disputes, of course, about, Mary Magdalene and her background and reality versus some of the traditions that have arisen about who exactly she was, in her past and all that. But I just thought in the movie, I thought did a great job, especially of her being right at Mary's side. And for me, for whatever reason, that really is kind of a special thing about her and John. It's like the brothers, the brother and sister almost,
right,
with the mother. And I think it really carries that across. And there's a real special connection I see in it, with her and Mary.
Mike Dents, what do you think?
Yeah, that's exactly what I was thinking when you first talked about this, is that if you don't look at Mary Magdalene with the Blessed Mother, then you're not going to get it, because she's with her from the beginning. She's, and so she, if there was some sort of quasi-sexual tension thing, then you're not hanging out with his mom. That just kind of doesn't
right.
make sense.
Right.
But she's taking care of the Blessed Mother. She's there with her.
Mm-hmm.
And the traditional way of looking at those two at the cross is that Mary is always standing up straight because the weight of sin doesn't crush her because she's without sin. Whereas Mary Magdalene's always crouched down at the feet of Jesus because she's there, but she still has sin, the weight of original, that is right, crushing her. So she doesn't have the spiritual strength that Mary has to bear this. And any, traditional image of the crucifixion with John and the two Marys there will depict that. So I think that you have to look at her with the Blessed Mother to then shed a light on, okay, she's not an apostle like John. She's not a man. She's a woman, a follower. She's not the Blessed Mother. She's not perfect. How is she doing with this? And then how do we identify with her? How do we see ourselves in Mary Magdalene with the Blessed Mother, with Jesus? How does that help us see ourselves in her?
Andrew?
Yeah, I mean, you guys nailed it. And, I think the film, obviously did again an amazing job portraying this pivotal character from the Passion story and in the resurrection story. She's obviously the first witness, the first person to witness the resurrected Christ. And she is the person that has to tell all the disciples and everyone else that Jesus is risen. And we obviously know the story from the Gospels that, she wasn't met with the most trusting, they didn't really trust her because obviously demons were literally in her. That what we know about Mary Magdalene is that she was possessed by demons. She's not the most credible witness. Like, as you guys have stated, like her relationship with Christ was literally that 180, that after that line in the sand moment where she just devoted her whole heart, her whole life to Christ, as any man or woman who chooses a religious life does now. It's no different than that.
So I want to kind of shift gears and talk about the figure of Satan in this movie. I don't want to spend too much time on it, but I want to read a quote from Mel Gibson about why he included Satan, who doesn't show up in this way in the Gospels, but he had a purpose. He says, and this is specifically about that scene in during the scourging where you see the Satan figure walking around with this ugly demon baby. And this is what he says: "It's evil distorting what's good. What is more tender and beautiful than a mother and a child?" So the devil takes that and distorts it just a little bit. instead of a normal mother and child, you have an androgynous figure holding a 40-year-old baby with hair in his back. It's weird. It's shocking. It's almost too much. Just like turning Jesus over to continue scourging him on his chest is shocking and almost too much, which is the exact moment when the appearance of the devil and the baby takes place. So we have this androgynous figure who's sort of a mockery of his mother in one sense, a mockery of Jesus himself in another sense. The tempter keeps trying to get him to either despair, like in the agony in the garden, you just give up. It's not going to work. Just why are you bothering? The Father's not listening to you while you pray here. That temptation in the garden, and then just at the other points, just that figure that lurks in the background, reveling in the suffering that Christ is enduring in this. What do you think of Mel Gibson's inclusion of the Satan figure in this movie in this way? I'll go to you, Mike Denz, on that.
It was interesting. I loved the temptation in the garden because first off, it was cool. I mean, they did a cool job. They had this androgynous looking person who was all shaved with this cloak, speaking Latin. It was kind of like, okay, but also rotten to the core. There was one point when a maggot climbed in and out of its nostril.
Right. The snake on its arm or something, right?
Yeah. And then the snake came out. And there's the two things that happened there that, these are some deeper things that, the benefit and blessing of knowing, more about what's going on here. Like, he didn't know. He still wasn't sure. He's like, who are you? Who is your father? The whole time while I said, like, Jesus is driving this forward. He's the one who's doing this. Satan is an onlooker and just trying to like mock, like, you're looking at your mother for strength. Look at me with this creepy baby. It's almost laughable in a certain sense, as much as it is diabolical. But my favorite part was the temptation, and then Jesus. He turned the corner from, Father, if this can be taken from me, to, okay, you want to know who I am? I'm crushing this snake's head. Ring a bell, and now I'm doing it, and now it's on. Now we're going. And from that point on, Jesus is like, I'm doing this. I'm moving forward. Nothing holding me back. No wavering. No agony in the garden. And Satan is just kind of left there trying to be Satan, but really is left off to the side till the very end when, that scream of his, oh my gosh, what happened? What have I done by inducing Judas to do this? It's really like, the exorcist will say that God humiliates the demons because of their pride. They are constantly humiliated. And this was the ultimate humiliation. Satan's like, all right, this is my time. Look what I'm doing. I got this apparent Messiah. And then it all turns around for him.
Andrew, what about you?
Yeah, I think the decision to include Satan in the film is every movie needs a antagonist, and obviously you want to portray the antagonist of this story. It's obviously Satan. Again, when we talk about foreshadowing, again the scene, crushing the head of the snake, and then at the very end, after Christ dies, Satan's screaming up into the sky because death has been defeated. Satan's been defeated. The bad guy lost, right? So that's as far as a film narrative decision, I think that added that layer that the film that added a lot to the movie. Yeah, the choice of casting a woman but making it androgynous was, I think, was great. It was symbolic because Satan. We're going to portray Satan to a visual human audience. Make the person look not human. Make the person look. You don't know the gender. You're not swung one way or the other about saying he's masculine, feminine, all at the same time. And I thought that was a clever choice as well. And yeah, I think it added to the aesthetic of the film. I mean, because as gory and as bloody as the Passion is, a lot of people would say that this movie, like you mentioned, Peter Craig said is the most beautiful movie ever made. There is beauty in this film among all the violent aspects of it and the bloodiness. But the real darkness really comes when those few pivotal scenes that Satan appears. Those are ugly moments of the film. And yeah, again, he really nailed it.
Mike Creevy?
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is that what I think is interesting about the whole, androgynous aspect to it, and just in addition to what you guys were saying, is really that it helps, I think, to reinforce the idea that, Satan doesn't have any interest in appearing usually at all, but when he does, it's, even in scripture, it's enticing, it's whispering in your ear, it's as an angel of light, that kind of thing, because it doesn't do him any good to show up with horns and, like a lot of the depictions we normally think of. So I actually found it more creepy in that it's just like you guys said, a character who looks strange and not quite human, but because it's a woman who's, I think she's an Italian actress or model, but like head shaved, eyebrows shaved, has this strange look, but there's something kind of beautiful about her.
Right.
It's
distorted beauty.
That's it. Right.
Yeah.
So it's just, for me, I always thought that was very well done for that reason alone.
Yeah. It could have been easy to just cast someone who was overweight or, misshapen or, to show how evil is all, distorts and is ugly and or whatnot, or to put prosthetics on a person to make them look ugly. But you're right. It was that subtle, like take a beautiful woman and then distort her by making her skin pale and taking all her hair off and, all that sort of stuff. Yeah, you're right. That's an interesting point. All right. So I think it would be appropriate to end the movie talking about the man himself, Jesus, and portrayed by Jim Caviezel. What do you guys think about Jim Caviezel's portrayal and the whole movie, obviously all the great parts of it, but maybe how he did in the crucifixion scenes of the movie. What do you think of Jim Caviezel in this movie? I don't know who wants to start first. Mike, since you went last time, I'll let Mike Creevy, I'll let you go first this time.
Well, I think one thing that always struck me a lot about him, and I guess they did this, with glue and some other, makeup effects and stuff. And he talked about how much it messed up his depth perception. There's all sorts of stuff you guys know, all the
stories
of the production,
mm-hmm.
And like the lightning strike and all that. There's all sorts of crazy stuff. But I was always pretty amazed that, in the flashbacks, you see him kind of, uninjured, but really in the main narrative of the movie, from the garden beat up all the way to the end, he's got one eye shut. And I mean, I don't know how you carry across so much meaning and so much, like the gaze of Christ that he pulls off with one eye. Is pretty impressive.
He's got more talent in one eye.
and it's so amazing. I thought, because like one thing I always noticed that was really cool, and I kind of verified it again watching it, today, is there's probably a good half dozen times or so that there's like a side character, or like I remember like Barabbas. There's a good moment where Jesus just kind of looks with this complete, just unspeaking look of compassion and mercy at somebody. And they can't look for long, and they look away, and that I thought was really incredible. And then all the way up through, I remember being very affected at the time by the way that Simon of Cyrene was portrayed,
mm-hmm.
and their brief interaction on screen, to the point where you have Simon of Cyrene, who's resisting it at first, then like coaching him. He doesn't really know what's going on, but you get the impression that he knows this guy does not belong here if justice, we're truly respected in this world.
Right.
And he's just there. Like, it's like, he just feels compelled to kind of coach him on, like, almost done, you're almost finished, and that's just a really powerful moment. And then, I'd say the last thing that really I thought was so interesting was, when he looks up and he's dying on the cross, after giving John to Mary, and, he says, into your hands, I commend my spirit. And it's so incredibly gripping and powerful as it slowly just starts to pull back, and they see, I think they digitally did it, I guess. Yeah. His pupil, right? The pupil dilates.
Yeah.
And then he, so just even like the little medical details and things like that are just so, like, right up to the end, just incredible. So I don't know how anyone could have done a better job than he did. It's still very captivating.
He's a revelation. I mean, the performance was, I mean, no pun intended, but the performance was, he really portrayed Christ as a hero, a heroic figure. I mean, because you could have easily portrayed Christ as someone that you just felt really sorry for, throughout the whole film, victim. Because the film doesn't let up with, obviously all the punishment, but weaving through all of that, he really nailed the flashback scenes where you get to see Christ, the intimate, how intimate he was with the disciples, all the way up to those brutal scenes on the cross. That's not easy. I mean, you're asking an actor, like you said, maybe more than half the film with only one eye open, a big majority of the film on top of a cross, and not being able to emote with your hands or your body. You're really asking a lot from an actor, and this is someone who was relatively unknown at the time. They could have easily cast a big name. We had a big name director behind it. Could have easily casted someone else. I see now, like the decision to pick Jim Caviezel, because whatever he did in auditions, however they chose to cast him, they really found the right qualities. Because up until now, we usually see hippie Jesus. Right. In a film, a very clean and friendly sort of figure, and you usually see Christ with a few lashes, on the cross, and he's still pretty clean. But portraying the scene where the blood and then the water flows out from his side, flows out from the side because you've bled every last drop. That's the only way water would come out. So to believe that, again, going back to the argument about the violence, for that to be believable, all the blood had to come out somehow. And I think he really portrayed that suffering to a believable point on screen. It's not an easy thing to do.
How about you, Mike Dentz?
I want to make sure I mentioned that I think this is like the Pietà or the Sixtine Chapel of films. This is a work of art. And I know that's a high praise, but I really think, there's certainly no other film that touches it. But it is that beautiful and that well done of a film that I've always thought of it that way. But with Jim Caviezel, I mean, I've followed him. I knew of him beforehand. I remember one time seeing him run in a movie, and I saw part of his scapular pop up below his T-shirt. He wasn't a Catholic in the movie, but he wasn't taking that off because for the film. So you're gonna have to deal with it. But when Gibson talked about it, I think I'm like 90% sure that Gibson, like, I want Jim, let's get Jim, and he described one part of it is, I want a muscular, strong, powerful Jesus. I don't want some wimpy, mamby-pamby, tiptoe through the tulips Jesus. I want a guy that was a carpenter, that could handle himself, that was strong. And I think, especially in the scenes where the flashbacks, he appeared like a man, when you saw him drawing the line in the sand, as you say, he was, physically imposing, not like Schwarzenegger or anything, but, just a man, a tough guy. But what Gibson said that really struck me, reminded me of people that I met in Steubenville and some others. It's a rare thing, but they're so in love with Christ, they're so spiritual that they have an otherworldly quality. And that's what Gibson said. Caviezel has an otherworldly quality about him. And you can, if you ever see Caviezel interview, and he's not in character for something, he's like, he has 1 foot on earth and 1 foot in heaven. He is a spiritual guy. And he comes at you from a spiritual dimension that, either you get it and you think you're like, wow, or you're this guy's kind of kooky. And I think that was necessary for him to be able to do things like, act with one eye with a contact lens in it, and all that other stuff, the scene where he climbed on the cross, like, I lay down my own life, and he's there climbing through the rocks and laying down on the cross himself, and how Caviezel portrayed that and everything. I don't think anyone else could have done it, because it wasn't just a great actor. You had to have someone with faith doing this, and that's what it took.
Mike Creevy, that you're going to be doing an episode soon of this podcast on the Thin Red Line. We're starring Jim Caviezel in a Terrence Malick movie, and I remember Jim Caviezel talking about the spiritual experience he had in that movie with Terrence Malick, who's a spiritual guy himself. I remember him telling a story once about getting that part. But so it'll be interesting to hear you talk about that when that podcast comes around. Caviezel's role in that was a few years before this. So I do want to, as we wrap up here, I do want to mention that there has been talk of a sequel, The Passion of the Christ 2. No, actually, they are calling it the Resurrection of the Christ. And Gibson's been talking about it for about 4 years now, since about 2016. He and Randall Wallace, who he wrote Braveheart with, we have been working on it. They talked to Jim Caviezel about being in it. Who knows when that'll come? But I don't think it's been definitively said no or definitively said yes. But I think they were still working on it. So it would be interesting to see. People had been clamoring for a sequel from the beginning. So we'll see how it goes to portray this movie. Because again, as we said at the beginning, this movie, part of it is that it's not about teaching you all about the teachings of Jesus and his parables and the commandments, but about giving you this moment where the gospel was preached in his actions, how that will work in a movie about the resurrection. So I'd be curious to see that. Yeah, I think unless you guys have any last thoughts, I think it would be good to wrap things up, and because we could talk for hours about this movie, and maybe we will have another chance to talk about this movie again, maybe in a future Lent. That would be appropriate, I think. But
I would like to just throw in one quick little one more pitch if people have not heard the soundtrack, because John Debney, it's so funny because I was double checking here. The last movie that he had done the soundtrack for before The Passion, I think, was Welcome to Mooseport.
Oh wow!
And he did. And it's funny because he's one of these guys I'm looking at as a list, and he's just one of these guys who's just been working constantly, since like the early 80s or something like that. So, but I don't know how. I've been trying to find out. I've never seen the story of how he got that over. I mean, you figure it's 2003 or two, and they're doing pre-production. How do you get that over John Williams, Hans Zimmer, James Horner?
Right. All these other guys.
It's iconic, and I will routinely listen to that soundtrack like while I'm working, or I'll have it on the background, because it's just, I mean, to me, it's musically what the Stations of the Cross is, like liturgically. It's just, it's that powerful for me. So without that soundtrack, the soundtrack was a huge part of the whole experience for me, and continues to be. And
it's interesting, they released a couple other albums with it of songs inspired by contemporary Christian artists and others. So it's kind of an interesting phenomena that sprung up around the music of this movie. But you're right, the music was pretty phenomenal in this. It was just enough and just struck the right tone. John Debney knew what he was doing. Good.
Yeah, he did. Yeah, I just wanted to add, I mean, I think just want to point out, box office wise, this was the highest grossing rated R movie for the longest time until Deadpool just a few years ago. And then Joker recently just beat Deadpool. But it's still I think it's still maybe what you're about to say, it's still the highest grossing non-English language film of all time.
Until I think it was surpassed by Parasite. Actually, was it?
I don't think so. As far as box office gross,
okay, maybe I thought I saw somewhere that it had.
You might be right. I don't know how recent the last thing I read it was about it.
Okay, but nevertheless,
the sequel should come out. A movie if it's that successful, the sequel should come out. I think Mel Gibson should have a problem with financing.
Here it is. It was the highest grossing non-English language film of all time until 2017. When it was surpassed by Wolf Warrior 2. I don't know what that is. But
that's probably all China.
To make the Passion sequel.
Yes, they need to make the sequel to fix that. All right. Looks like we actually lost Mike Denz. We lost his Skype connection, so we'll have to sign off without him. But we do want to take a moment to thank our patrons who make it possible for us to create the secrets of movies and TV shows. Including Mark A., Gwen L., Tabitha M., David B., and Roger and Julie J. Their generous donations at sqpn.com/give make it possible for us to continue the secrets of movies and TV shows and all the shows we do at StarQuest. You can join them by visiting sqpn.com/give. So that's it from us. What did you think of The Passion of the Christ? Was it a great movie for you? Was it not a great movie for you? Did you have problems with it? Is it not a movie that you like? We'd love to hear from you. What did you think of the things that we talked about in the various relationships and the themes in the movie? We people have opinions. We know you have opinions. So let us know by commenting on the show where it's posted at sqpn.com/secrets or the StarQuest Facebook page at facebook.com/StarQuestMedia, or send an email to secrets@sqpn.com. Until next time, Mike Creevy, thank you for joining me in sharing the secrets of the Passion of the Christ.
Oh, it was my pleasure.
Andrew Hermans, thank you as well.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
And Mike Denz, we thank Mike Denz for joining us. And once again, I'm Dom Bettinelli. Thank you for listening to the secrets of movies and TV shows on StarQuest. And have a happy Easter, everyone.